Thank you so much.
Dear Father in Heaven, we're thankful for this day. We're thankful for our health and for the blessings of our lives and so many things we have in abundance that we take for granted that have been made more apparent to us in this classroom, especially the blessings of freedom, and help us especially today as we discover what the end results of colonization brought. Help us to perceive some of the ways in which Satan takes advantage of situations to further his ends on this earth. And we're thankful for this class and for the things it brings to our attention. We say these things in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.
Amen. Thank you very much for that prayer, Wendy. I do appreciate it. Okay, so today we have kind of a heavy subject, but one certainly with lots of important lessons for us, and one that ultimately has a better ending than a beginning, that's for sure. So let's get started talking about apartheid, which was and is a legacy of colonialism in South Africa. Welcome, Heidi. How are you today?
Fine, thank you.
Hello, Heidi.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, yes, good. I was worried there for a moment. Okay, well, let's get started then. So, signs of the time. It's interesting to note that South Africa accounts for 20% of Africa's crops, 40% of the continent's manufactures, and 50% of its minerals. So this is a land that is blessed with a rich abundance. It is also responsible, though, for this sign and others like it. So I want you to take a look at this sign here. What does this sign teach you about South Africa? And what demographic conditions in South Africa give context to this sign?
Demographic, you mean like the mix of blacks, the Indians, and the Dutch?
Yeah, definitely. Great, right? So that's a good memory, Wendy. So, for example, we have these different groups. And if we think about it, we have the Dutch coming about 1651 and leaving some people there, coming a little bit later as well. We have the British coming in around the turn of the century. And then we have these two, what we may call white groups, if you will. And then we have the native Africans, of course, many different tribes, different groups of peoples. And then we have the Indians from India, who the British brought over from their Indian colony. And so we have these four different groups mingling together, and of course this ends up being a result of that mixture. Okay, excellent. So what else? What else? What does this sign teach us then about South Africa?
Well, it teaches you that color was made an issue.
Yeah, definitely. And as it was made an issue, how did they choose to deal with it? Because, of course, you can have four different... You don't have to react this way necessarily. You don't have to choose this path. But what path did they choose?
To segregate themselves.
The same path that their country chose in their motives for colonization in the first place, that they were superior.
Yeah, excellent point, Wendy. Thank you for that. Welcome, Walter. How are you today?
Good.
Good. We're glad to have you with us. We look forward to your participation. So here we go. So we keep moving on then. So let's research, right? You've done the reading, hopefully. You've been able to read a little bit. This UN Resolution 1598 on race conflict in South Africa from 19... So I want you to reason then. What does the UN resolution call for? And what reasons does it give for its demand?
Now, was that what was on page 71?
Yep, yeah, that was the very first reading for today.
Now, how come it says 1598? Oh, I see. That's just the number of the resolution. Okay, sorry, I was looking at the year. I was a little confused.
Oh, no, that's okay.
It demands that they bring their policies in line with the United Nations policy of ending colonization and apartheid.
Yep, that's right. Okay, so Wendy, I heard a couple things there. The first is that, as you said, the UN was calling for South Africa, a member nation of the United Nations, to come into line with the UN's policies, right? So whether this be the UN Charter, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, etc. And then what I also heard you say was that it was calling for an end specifically to apartheid, right? So that, these documents that the UN, governed itself by and that it tried to govern the member nations of the world by, called for an end to apartheid. And so it's interesting as we take a look at this today then. Of course, the document gives several reasons, and so I want us to reason together as we look at this document. What do you think about the UN's reasons for ending race conflict in South Africa? And why do you think what you think about each reason? So here are some of the stated reasons. That there were discriminatory laws and measures based on race, which then led to violence and bloodshed in South Africa. That discrimination of this sort is repugnant to human dignity. That it was a violation of not only the Charter of the UN, but also the Declaration of Human Rights. And of course, South Africa was a member of the UN at this time. And then the fourth one would be that South Africa's policies have led to international friction, and then that friction then endangers world peace, right? So here are the reasons that the UN states, right? What do we think about those reasons and why?
I think those are symptoms, not root causes of the problem. United Nations never manages to get around to the fact that human dignity, we have human dignity because of God grants it to us. They never get at the root of the problem, which is that we're not following God.
Definitely, right? So, it's like, hey, you can give me 1,000,000 Band-Aids, but if I have cancer, it doesn't matter, right? Definitely. Thank you so much for that, Wendy. What else do we think about these, either individually, collectively, however you'd like to attack them?
Well, I would say the first two I definitely agree with. I don't believe in discriminatory laws, and I do believe that discrimination is repugnant to human dignity. I'm not really sure about the second two, though. I thought that the treaty itself seemed to be a little hypocritical. Just because it was saying, I don't know, it just was sort of like, you're not doing what we're telling you to, but wasn't that the problem in the first place, is that people weren't doing what somebody else was telling them to? So.
Yeah, great. Thank you for that, Heidi. Great comment.
And I'm not sure about the last one, that their policies have led to, I'm not sure why they're saying it endangers all of world peace, unless, of course, they're saying you're setting a bad example to other countries by not following what we're telling you to do, and we don't want people to think they can get away with not following what we say. Is that what? I don't know.
Yeah, no, and that's a great point. Certainly, the fourth one is kind of nebulous. You're kind of thinking, well, I mean, maybe you can kind of see it, not really, And so the fourth one is definitely controversial, to say the least. Now, did we lose Walter? He went away.
It says offline. I'm not sure what that means. I've never seen it say that before.
I'm trying to think here.
Wendy, have you ever seen it say offline after someone's name before?
No, and I've never seen the name appear there without a little icon next to it either.
Right.
Oh, that's true, yeah.
Well, hopefully he'll sign back on then. Okay, well, okay. If we look then, and we think about racial discrimination, right? Because, and of course, we have to, I think we have to be, in the day we live in, we have to be very careful about, what kind of quote-unquote discrimination we're talking about, right? Because you have lots of groups that could talk about discrimination, so-called, perhaps, for lots of things. And so we're talking about racial discrimination specifically right now. And so just want to throw it out there as we try to just make this a little more real, for our class today. Have you ever witnessed racial discrimination in your life, anywhere, anytime? How did it make you feel and why?
actually heard about it in the Mormon Church, which really freaked me out. I met someone from Southern Carolina, South Carolina, and she was saying that their stake had planned a temple trip, probably to Washington, D.C. temple, I'm not sure. And once the whites found out that the blacks were going to be on the bus, they decided not to go to the temple, and I just thought, how ironic. You know, this is a temple trip.
Mm-hmm.
That really surprised me.
Yeah, you know, that's so, and what a sad thing. And you think about the whole purpose behind the temple and what's taught there, and the whole message of the plan of salvation. That is a sad thing, and certainly shows, you know, an underlying ignorance just about the gospel. If that were to be your reason for not going to the temple. Thanks, you know, for that example. What about you, Heidi? I guess it's just three of us right now, so.
Well, you know, I guess I'm thinking of the Rodney King riots, whether that was really racial or whether that's just the way it was portrayed on in the media. You never really know.
Sure.
But anytime that you feel like someone's being punished or discriminated against simply because of the color of their skin, it always makes you feel extremely uncomfortable knowing that they absolutely have no control over that. What if they decided to beat you because you had brown hair? I mean,
Sure.
it's just
Sure.
it's very unfortunate.
Yeah, you know, and it's interesting. As a missionary in South Korea, you know, Korea is a very homogeneous society, and so to have a couple of, you know, white young men walking down the street in, you know, black suits with our name tags and all of that, it was very interesting because, of course, you know, most people were great, but from time to time, you know, we would get really nasty comments before we'd even opened our mouths, before they knew anything about us, before they even, I think, had, you know, really taken the time to see that we were from a church or what church or anything like that. And so the interesting thing was that people would say, hey, listen, you know, I don't want to talk to you. You're just another arrogant Westerner. You know, I don't care where you're from, but you probably think you're better than everybody else in the world, and so you're trying to force your way on others, you know, et cetera, et cetera. You know, just because of the color of my skin. Now, you know, interesting, you know, I could have been from anywhere, but because of my skin, right, that was sort of that identifier that then led to sort of the stereotype and the assumptions that then fueled the comments before I'd even, you know, engaged with the person at all. So certainly, you know, it works both ways.
Well, you know, I have an experience about it working the other way, and that's with this whole movement of talking about the Tea Partiers being, you know, racist.
Mm-hmm.
I find that extremely disturbing because they're just using it, in my opinion, as a card to try to get people to discredit what people who are basically dissatisfied with the way the government is going now, and there's really, I don't think there's really any truth to it. They're just using the race card, because I went back to Washington, D.C., and I didn't see any of that. And for them to say that the Tea Partyists are racist, I feel like it's almost being used in the opposite way, if that makes sense. Because we're white,
oh, yeah.
and we're speaking out. They're saying we're saying it's because we don't like the color of our president's skin. Where to me, that's just it's offensive. It's like that has nothing to do with it. So I don't know if that applies, but it's just making me think of it.
Yeah, certainly, right. Could be a red herring for sure. You know, something that people, you know, try to put in front of the real issue to draw attention away from the real issue and draw out to something controversial. So yeah, that's a great point. And you know, it's interesting though. Of course, you know, as we think about this, as we think about, I mean, we've all different incidents. Of course, right? You know, there's this deep feeling inside that, boy, aren't we all children of God? You know, why can't we treat each other that way? So you know, thank you so much for that. Here's the neat talk that I wanted to share. And welcome, Caden. How are you?
I'm great.
Good. Well, this is from Elder Russell M. Nelson. Teach Us Tolerance and Love. This is May 1994, so from the April conference. He said the following, and Caden, would you like to read the first paragraph, Wendy the second, and Heidi the third?
Yep.
Okay, thanks so much.
You're welcome. God's children can be so intolerant with one another. Neighboring factions, whether they be identified as groups or gangs, schools or states, counties or countries, often develop animosity. Such tendencies make me wonder, Cannot boundary lines exist without becoming battle lines? Could not people unite in waging war against the evils that beset mankind instead of waging war on each other? Sadly, answers to these questions are often no. Through the years, discrimination based on ethnic or religious identity has led to senseless slaughter, vicious pogroms, and countless acts of cruelty. The face of history is pocked. Oh man, pocked? Is that right? Probably pocked. Pocked by the ugly scars of intolerance.
Oh, does anyone else hear a hideous noise? Okay, there we go. That's better. Whatever happened, that was great.
Well,
we don't hear that noise.
it's going to happen again now. If you want me to read it, it's going to.
Oh, you think so?
Well, it's probably the static from my, I don't know, every time I'm unmuted, I think you guys hear static. But anyway,
Yeah.
I'll mute myself as soon as I'm done reading. How different our world would be if all parents would apply this inspired instruction from the Book of Mormon. You will not suffer your children that they transgress the laws of God and fight and quarrel one with another, but you will teach them to walk in the ways of truth and soberness. You will teach them to love one another and to serve one another.
If such training occurred, children and parents around this globe would join in singing, "Fill our hearts with sweet forgiving, teach us tolerance and love." Men and women would respect their neighbors and the beliefs held sacred by them. No longer would ethnic jokes and cultural slurs be acceptable. The tongue of the tolerant speaks no guile.
Great. So, what do you think about this? I mean, why is it hard sometimes for people? What does this have to do with apartheid?
Oh, go ahead.
I'm just thinking where Caden read, cannot boundary lines exist without becoming battle lines? I think there needs to be that ability to disagree, to agree to disagree, and to do so in a civil line. And I loved the part that said something about, oh yeah, let's see, could not people unite in waging war against the evils that beset mankind instead of waging war on each other? I think sometimes we get lost in thinking we have to be right rather than let's figure out what is right.
Yeah, definitely, right? And so that, of course, goes to the root, which is pride, right? Because pride leads to enmity, right, with God and man, creates competition or comparing. We have to be the better person, the better group, and so therefore to be the better group, we have to put down the other groups or the other person, and so this pride we see is just the root of a whole host of other evils and sins and just so much sadness and destruction in the world. Definitely, thank you for that. Caden, what were you going to say?
Yeah, well, this kind of goes with what Wendy or Heidi said. Sorry, or was it Wendy? I think it was Heidi. It was Heidi, Mrs. Johnson. Okay, but I thought of a saying that goes, problems divide, principles unite. And everyone's different, and everyone believes in different things, but if we can all be united on the principles that this nation is founded on, then I think that would get rid of a lot of the problems that people have with discrimination. But it's interesting that I think that he said this kind of around when the proclamation to the world came out. I'm not for sure. I think that might have been 2001 actually.
95.
Oh, 95.
And then reissued 2000. Okay.
But yeah, I think all these things are interesting. And then we had this homosexual movement, and it's important that we I look at the very last line: "The tongue of the tolerant speaks no guile." It's important that we understand that there are behaviors that are wrong, and we need to make sure that we protect what God has given us. But we need to do it within the bounds that the Lord would have us do it. Defend what God has given us with loving words. Because He would never have us put down anyone else.
Yeah. Thanks for that, Caden. Thank you, and welcome, Walter. Walter, what happened, my friend?
My computer froze up. So
Oh,
I had
I
to
see. Things are better now, though?
restart things. Yep.
Okay, great. Well, we're sorry that you missed a little bit, but we're happy you're back.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, well, one more quote here. President Hinckley talked about the need for greater kindness in the April 2006 General Conference. Walter, would you read this for us, please?
Sure.
Thanks so much.
Throughout my service as a member of the First Presidency, I have recognized and spoken a number of times on the diversity we see in our society. It is all about us, and we must make an effort to accommodate that diversity. Let us all recognize that each of us is a son or daughter of our Father in heaven who loves all of his children. Brethren, there is no basis for racial hatred among the priesthood of this church. If any within sound of my voice is inclined to indulge in this, then let him go before the Lord and ask for forgiveness and be no more involved in such.
Thanks so much. Is there any part of this quote by President Hinckley that really jumps out at you? There's one for me.
Well, this is kind of off topic, but I think in '06, I don't know what diversity meant then, but now it means homosexuality, not just racial diversity. So, having said that, I would rephrase that line about accommodating diversity.
Yeah, I actually have a slide
also
about that in the next one.
There's a part where it says, it is all about us. We must make an effort to accommodate that diversity. Oh, never mind. I read that weird. It's all about us, meaning it's all, okay. I was going to ask a question like what he meant, but I think maybe he's saying it's all around us. So all right, never mind.
No, that's okay. Yeah.
I thought he was saying like it's all up to us or something. Okay, never mind.
Right. No, that's okay. That's fine.
Hayden, I read it the same way too, so I'm glad you clarified that. Yeah.
Yeah.
I didn't get it either.
Well, I'm glad we're all on the same page now. Yeah, there's one part here certainly, if we right are unrighteous in this area, if we I think it's so important that what does he say at the end? If any within the sound of my voice is inclined to indulge in this, then let him go before the Lord and ask for forgiveness and be no more involved in such. And that will ultimately be the message of what happens with apartheid. And so it'll be interesting as we see this. Well, of course, I was, my little antenna went up as I read these quotes. So I came up with this slide that I wanted to chat about together. Right? Do tolerance and accommodating diversity. Right? Elder Nelson talked about tolerance. Right? And then President Hinckley talked about accommodating diversity. Right? Do tolerance and accommodating diversity require us to tolerate and accommodate sin? What's the difference, and what does the answer have to do with the phrase tyranny of tolerance?
Was it Oakes who gave the talk on law versus love? Was that Oakes last conference? I think that's a good answer. No, it doesn't require us to tolerate sin. In fact, that would be the wrong approach. But he said there's wrong approaches on both ends. We don't, and I don't think he specifically mentioned homosexuality, but it seemed like that's what he was addressing, because there's all these parents who are, going towards one of two extremes, either completely distancing themselves from their children, saying you're a sinner and having nothing to do with them, or embracing the child along with the sin and saying the church is the one that needs to change. And he's saying that the answer is somewhere, it's at neither of those extremes, and we need to be prayerful about how to handle these situations.
Yeah, thanks for that comment. What else would we say here?
When I think of tyranny of tolerance, I kind of thought of the tyranny of the poor in a socialistic or communistic society, and I wonder, I might be way off, but I think tyranny of tolerance might be when we tolerate certain behaviors, because it's against the laws of nature, we could bring upon ourselves enslavement. Because I look in the Book of Mormon, all the examples of all the cities that were destroyed or enslaved or brought down to bondage because they embraced things that were against the laws of God. And so when we okay, I'm still thinking about this, but what it's the difference between tolerating and accommodating is oh, never mind. I'm gonna think more. I'm still thinking about it.
Okay. Any other thoughts here? Because this phrase "tyranny of tolerance" is one that's been used many times in the past few years. There was a book written by a justice who talked about the drift of society and how it's basically now, almost forcing people to be tolerant, which means that, they have to accept anything, and if they don't, then that's being intolerant, and being intolerant is sort of the worst thing you could ever be in today's society. And so because of that, we see the decay of religious freedoms, the freedom to believe that things are, I dare say, wrong, right? The freedom to say that things are sin, right? People are trying to take that away from many religious groups. And so it's interesting, Elder Bednar used this phrase in talking about Proposition 8 when he was talking about the other side. Basically, people are saying that who can disagree with tolerance, right? I mean, just who can say that it's a bad thing to, put up with somebody else, to just, respect them and let them do what they want, and then, live and let live, etc. That's sort of the line of reasoning, but yet it's interesting because it's not really live and let live. It's you let me live the way I want to live, and then I'll attack you for ever thinking that I shouldn't have lived that way. And so that's this tyranny of tolerance, right, where we have to be so hypersensitive about being tolerant that now we can't call things sin when the Lord has said they're sin anymore, even if we do it with love and respect and kindness, etc. And so that's this very interesting phrase, tyranny of tolerance. I'm sure you'll hear it more and more. Well, if we look then at apartheid, because of course it has to do with a lot of these things we've been talking about, what specifically was it? From your reading, what would you say? What was apartheid?
Well, I admit I don't know a lot about this, but I mean, of course I've heard of it, but they were only buzzwords I heard, and I didn't really know what was going on. But from what I'm gathering, it sounded like it was basically the development of two different communities within kind of the same geographical region, that the whites kind of developed their own life, and they wanted the blacks and the Indians to develop their own life, including commerce and all that kind of thing. Is that right?
Yeah, definitely.
It's just not the merging of the two different races.
Right. So separating. Yeah. So let's look at it specifically then. So the word apartheid, right, is from Afrikaans, okay, an Afrikaner word, literally apart and then hood, right? So aparthood, you could think of it as separateness. The Merriam-Webster Online Dictionary would say racial segregation, specifically a former policy of segregation and political and economic discrimination against non-European groups in the Republic of South Africa. And so if we look at that specifically, right, it came into law in 1948, and then of course, things break down, takes a little time, but about 94, 93, if you want to go to 91, 93, 94, somewhere around there, okay, is when it ended. Well, so we had 25 million blacks, and in this time, rights that they already had as citizens of South Africa were revoked in 1948. We see less than 5 million whites holding governmental power, right? So we have this 1-to-5 ratio, right? And so what it was, as Heidi was saying, right, it was legalized racial separation and separate development, whether that be social development, economic development, political development, just developing separately, right? What it did was it legalized notions of racial hierarchy, that, whites are just better, that God would say that they're better, that God would say that Africans are worse, that they're at the bottom, and so we have a right, to subjugate them, give them laws that are less than the ones that we as whites enjoy, that was legalized. So there was discrimination then, of course, based on skin color. It's all about skin. And so as we look at what this actually meant, right, because it's one thing to say separate development. It's another thing to really see how that fleshed out. So there were distinct zones that were created based on color, right, for work and for housing. Bantustans, okay, which are homelands or independent states, very similar, really little difference at all, to a reservation, were set up for different tribal groupings. There were 4 tribal groupings that were created, and then whites would determine, based on a couple different criteria, which grouping you belonged in, and therefore which reservation you would go to. Okay, as part of this, blacks could not participate in national South African government, even though they'd participated in it before. And so we now see ethnic governments, racial governments, right, set up on the Bantustans. And so, if they wanted to vote, well, they could vote, but only on the reservation. They couldn't vote for anything else in South Africa once they were placed, right, in these new separate homelands. Their citizenship then was, as a result, transferred from national South Africa to the independent Bantustans with the stroke of a pen, right? And so we see over 9 million black South Africans denationalized, right? They went from one minute, they went to bed as, citizens of South Africa with the rights of citizens. They woke up the next morning without those rights. But yet they were given those rights on the reservations. Okay, passes were required to cross into national South Africa from the Bantustans. The passes were required to be in white zones, and so if you had work to do and you needed to leave your black zone, if you were black, then you would need a pass to do that. Property rights for blacks were restricted to the black zones of work and housing, as well as Bantustans if you weren't in a zone. Interracial marriages were illegal. Having an interracial relationship, even if it was platonic, would become a crime depending on what people thought of it, if it caused a stir. There were different educational tracks that were mandated for whites and blacks. Blacks were forced to learn technical skills. Whites worked towards professions. There were job reservation laws that held back certain jobs for whites only. Schools were segregated. Universities were segregated. Pass laws, which ended up becoming a symbol of apartheid sort of the world over, the pass system, required everyone 16 or older to carry a dompas, which was a pass, at all times, wherever they went. This pass had personal information, and not just sort of name and birthday and that sort of thing, but also work evaluations, your whole history. However the whites had judged you at your different jobs at different times, any police officer had a right to see that, and then to refuse you entrance to any zone at any time if he thought that you may be a problem because of your past evaluations. You could be kicked out of the zone with your family. You could be moved on to the Bantustans at any moment. There was arrest or prison for even technical violations of the past laws. If you didn't have certain signatures in place, if you didn't have certain documentation in place. If you tried to protest the past laws or apartheid in general, right, you were forbidden to engage in political activity, so you were silenced. No right to protest, no right to gather. You were forbidden to vote in South Africa to try to change things in the national government. That would then trickle down. You were forbidden to protest apartheid in any form. There was strict police action and then violence against violators, as we'll see. Also, there was either exile or the loss of the right to travel, to write, to speak publicly about these issues if you were deemed to be a protester. There was imprisonment without trial or right to an attorney if you committed an infraction. All citizens were registered by the government into races, one of the three, either white, black, or colored, which would be any mix. There were segregated public facilities. Governments could declare a state of emergency at any time and then thus increase harsh penalties. One example was Sharpeville in 1960, where blacks refused to carry the dompas passes And so then they began to protest. Well, the police they came in because of the laws against protesting, against don't-bus infractions. Shots rang out. The police killed 69 black protesters and wounded 187. This is when we see Nelson Mandela gain some international prominence. He organized guerrilla violent resistance, led by this organization called the ANC, or the African National Congress. He would be sentenced to life in prison for being connected with murders. In 1964, the ANC would continue a bloody struggle against apartheid while he was in jail. Okay, so, with all that said, now you know a little bit about apartheid. It's very interesting if you look at the reasons for it, the justifications by the white South Africans. So hopefully you've been able to read An Argument for Apartheid by A.L. Geyer from 1953. So what were some justifications for these policies that I just explained to you?
Well, as I was reading it, it kind of reminded me of some of the things we talked about yesterday, where if you implement something slowly and kind of gradually give people their independence, you know, the quote we read, whether they're ready for it or not. I kind of thought that from this person's argument, that's kind of what he sounded like he was, you know, the way he was arguing it was, well, it really will be better for them rather than just giving them something they're not ready for.
Yeah. Did anybody else have any other takes on the justifications? Thanks for that comment, Heidi.
He talks about how every ounce of progress that had been created in their country came from sacrifice and work by the whites, and that it was apartheid was a policy of self-preservation. And you know, I think we can look at what's happening now to the white farmers in Africa and how their land is being confiscated by the government, and we can kind of see that we can kind of see a little bit truth to his horrible words. That you know, the reverse is happening now to the whites, and so
sure, right. So certainly real fears. I mean, think it's 5 to 1, 25 million to less than 5 million, right? I mean, so yeah, certainly real fears. I mean, you know, as he talks about here, he said, you know, the germ of this policy is inherent in all of our history, implanted there by the force of circumstances. Apartheid is a policy of self-preservation. We make no apology for possessing that very natural urge, but it is more than that. It is an attempt at self-preservation in a manner that will enable the Bantu to develop fully as a separate people. Now, to be very clear, he meant to develop separately on their Bantustans, on their reservations, never to come back into national South Africa. He wanted them to stay on those Bantustans, and he was saying that let the whites run national South Africa. And so certainly, you know, this self-preservation, you know, also other arguments that, well, hey, you know, a lot of these peoples, you know, they came as you know, voyagers, as sort of colonizers themselves way back when, and we did too, and so, you know, we're sort of equal in that way where, you know, we came and we've been here since, you know, 1650, and so, you know, in some cases we've been here, you know, longer than some of the tribes that moved here from other areas of Africa, you know, et cetera, so we have a right to do this. So, you know, lots of different justifications. Certainly interesting. Okay, well, as we think about this then, right, let's look sort of on the other side of the coin, right? Bishop Desmond Tutu, right, 1984. So of course we're fast forwarding a few years. He talks about the question of South Africa, and I put this at the bottom here, this little note, just because he didn't really come right out and say it necessarily, but he was the one who he was referring to about who won the Peace Prize that year. It was him. He received the Nobel Peace Prize for his efforts to end apartheid. Okay, and so what does he call for in this paper, The Question of South Africa?
Well, he calls for a peaceful end to what was happening. And also somehow to remove the root cause of, which I guess was apartheid, of what was causing all the problems in the first place.
Right, definitely. So certainly, you know, calling for an end to apartheid through peaceful measures, right? We have this quote here, white South Africans are not demons, and certainly, we have to credit him for being courageous enough, having that Christian courage enough to say that, right, after, the many years of suffering. White South Africans are not demons. They are ordinary human beings, scared human beings, many of them. Who would not be if they were outnumbered 5-1? Through this lofty body, I wish to appeal to my white fellow South Africans to share in building a new society, for blacks are not intent on driving whites into the sea, but on claiming only their rightful place in the sun and the land of their birth. We dream of a new society that will be truly non-racial, truly democratic, in which people count because they are created in the image of God. So certainly here, this is, and as Wendy said, it's interesting to see how things have sort of ended up. But in 1984, right, he wasn't talking about the need for reverse discrimination. He was talking about this sort of integration and cooperation, right, to work together to build a new South Africa, a post-apartheid South Africa. Well, if we look then, of course, how does this end? Well, about 10 years later, right, we see, the Afrikaner president of South Africa, William de Klerk, and then Nelson Mandela, working together. And then we see an open election for the first time. Mandela, who is released from prison, is able to, to win the election. And of course, we're not really here to talk about his policies, because certainly he believed in democratic socialism, tending towards communism, if you will, et cetera. So that's more for the Cold War aspect of our class. We'll treat that then. But certainly, as we look about just apartheid and how Mandela, as this new president, right, of post-apartheid Africa, right, how did he then want to deal, right, with the healing that needed to take place, right, in a post-apartheid state?
Well, one of the first things he wanted was to have democratic elections, which of course makes total sense.
Mm-hmm. And elections in which blacks, right, could regain nationalization, right, after having been denationalized, and so they could actually vote in a national election for South Africa rather than just on the Bantustan. Definitely. What else would we say?
He talks about a transition to democracy, and what's interesting is that since there were, like you say, 5-1 blacks over whites, and the ones that who had suffered under the hands of the British colonizers for so long were turned against the ideas of capitalism and free markets. The blacks tended to be turned towards the ideas of communism.
Yep.
And so, just by saying, oh, everyone gets one vote, everyone gets to vote now, that's basically just opening the door for communism, because that's what the blacks had been turned towards, with the ugly example of capitalism that the British had presented them for so many years. And so then so of course in his last statement, let there be justice for all, let there be peace for all, let there be work, bread, water, and salt for all. That's the part that gets me going.
Right, definitely.
They love to stick in the redistribution of wealth along with all the other stuff.
Right, definitely, right? So certainly, once again, it's something else with, two sides at least, right? And so, if you think about the ending of apartheid as sort of a triumph of human history, right, a time when, hey, at least we finally figured out, right, how to be a little more like the children of God that we really are, a little more like the brothers and sisters that we are. Getting rid of apartheid was certainly a nice step in that direction. But then, of course, it's like, one step forward, 2 steps back, right? And so certainly an interesting time, for South Africa, a country that, struggles, even today. And so certainly, he's talking about this message of hope. And so, because of that, he to this day is just this, revered figure. And most people don't even think about the fact that he turned South Africa into a socialist, if not communist state, So, it's very interesting. The memory in history is an interesting notion. Well, if we look then, how do you think South Africans can heal the wounds caused by apartheid? What can they do, right? I mean, was part of their legacy for so long. They're trying to break away from it now and start a new life. We're only, what, 15 years, out. What do you think? Where does it start?
Well, is the answer to this question really any different than if we put our own name in there and put wounds caused by any other thing? It all starts within ourselves, doesn't it? And just forgiving, and then picking ourselves up by the bootstraps and using the lesson to not repeat the problem and not making sure we don't implement it on somebody else, and then living our lives the best we can in a Christ-like manner.
Yeah, definitely, right? And certainly, I love how you brought in Christ, brought in the gospel, forgiveness, gospel principles, right? Think about it. If a country really wants to pick itself up, if it really wants to set itself on the right course, if it wants to build a strong foundation that can then sustain true righteous growth, in every way, right, that foundation has to be Christ, Christian principles, right? And so certainly these true principles, interesting. I was hunting through church publications looking for some stories, and I found some really neat stories here. It's very interesting as you look at this one. Take a moment to read this to yourself, and then say, what caused this positive change here in Soweto? What caused the change?
Well, only, this is the whole reason why Alma gave up his governorship or whatever, his political office, to preach the gospel, because that's the only way to right these wrongs. Africa, by giving the power to the majority black government, there may have been a few people who still had good motives, like maybe, I don't know if Desmond Tutu had pure motives, but if his words seemed to show that it would be possible for people to have a right heart about this and not prevent the same abuses from happening in the opposite direction,
Mm-hmm.
and yet apparently they have not been able to control that desire for for revenge or whatever to end up enacting the same kind of abuses that you used to complain of, and it's just a minority of hearts that are who don't want that to happen, and the only way to change that is to spread the gospel.
Yeah, definitely. It's a great answer, Wendy. Thank you so much. And I love this because I just love thinking of this city of Soweto, right? He said it was this symbol of terror and violence and rioting over apartheid. And then what happened? There was the gospel was preached, a little branch started, and then suddenly more and more members came to the church, and now, right, there is a stake in Soweto, right? And so there's this spirit of righteous tolerance, understanding, unity, and peace, etc. And so certainly, right, what a great example of the gospel changing, a city for the better, as it could change the country. I love this one here. We won't take the time to read it all, but this was a young man grew up in Kenya. He grew up, because of reading about apartheid in South Africa, he grew up just hating whites, saying, they have done so much damage. I hate them. If I were to see a white, I would want to do, violence to them, right? And the interesting thing is that this young man ends up joining the church. He's converted to the gospel. He ends up serving a mission, and as he's on a mission, he works with white companions, right? And so for the first time, he starts to realize, wait, I don't hate these people. I don't wish harm on them. Wow, my heart has been changed, right? My whole worldview has been changed because of the gospel of Jesus Christ, right? It's given me that forgiveness. It's given me that greater vision, right, to see the world as Christ would see the world, right? And so he talks about how, I felt how wonderful it is to teach this gospel together with my white companion. The gospel changed the course of my life. Great message there for us. Of course, we have this wonderful quote from Ephesians. Walter, would you read this one for us? Ephesians 2:19 through 22.
Sure. Now therefore ye are no more strangers and foreigners, but fellow citizens with the saints, and of the household of God, and are built upon the foundation of the apostles and prophets, Jesus Christ himself being the chief cornerstone, in whom all the building fitly framed together groweth unto an holy temple in the Lord, in whom we also are builded together for an habitation of God through the Spirit.
Excellent. Thanks so much. Wendy, I don't know the name of that movie. I'm sorry. And so what's the message here then? What is the message of Ephesians 2:19 through 22?
Well, it's kind of saying we are all one. We're all saints within the gospel. Isn't that kind of what it's saying? That we shouldn't be looking at each other based on the color of our skin or anything. It's just that we're all one. We're all of the household of God.
Yeah, definitely, right? The gospel is what unites us as church members. You know, we don't have to worry about people being strangers or being foreigners, right? Or being from one country or another or one skin color or another. You know, hey, if we are committed together to living the gospel, right, we have the same foundation. We have Christ, right, as the chief cornerstone. We have apostles and prophets, you know, etc. And so truly, we can then be a habitation of God, right, through the Spirit. We can have this Zion-like community as we start to see people in that way. Well, there's a wonderful talk. I would certainly recommend you reading it if you'd like, from Elder John K. Carmack of the 70s, Unity in Diversity. And now he's talking about righteous unity in righteous diversity, of course. And of course, you know, as Wendy said, we always have to be careful now with the terms because the meanings have changed. But he's talking about righteous unity and righteous diversity. And I love what he says here. He talks about how despite simple and unifying doctrines and practices, there are some barriers to creating greater unity amid our diversity. These barriers include racial and cultural discrimination and attitudes of separatism. So this goes back to what Wendy said, right, about that D.C. temple trip. Right? The gospel is marvelously sufficient to create the desired unity, but people are imperfect. Discomfort because of language barriers, fear of accepting those with differences in skin color, alienation of the unmarried, all have created barriers to unity. Usually, mistreatment, isolation, and discrimination are reinforced by the use of labels. Labeling a fellow church member an intellectual, a less active member, a feminist, a South African, an Armenian, a Utah Mormon, or a Mexican, right, for example, seems to provide an excuse to mistreat or ignore that person. These problems and many more need to be addressed if we are to create a society such as that which Enoch created. As we become one with God, we will become one with each other. As we become one with each other, we will become one with God. Right? Of a truth, I perceive that God is no respecter of persons, right, as Peter said. And he said, may we look for every opportunity, therefore, to decrease isolation, increase inclusion of all, and enrich our lives with this human diversity within the bonds of unifying doctrinal beliefs. As was the case in the International Art Exhibit of the Church Museum. You may have seen that. Beautiful. Let us find the common bond that links us through love and through Christ and his gospel. May the happy result be the emergence of unity in diversity. May we enjoy the happy circumstance of the Book of Mormon era when there were not to be found any manner of ites. So, here's the challenge for us, right? Ending, quote-unquote, apartheid in our own lives, right? Think of ways that you can do more to promote righteous unity in righteous diversity. Go out of your way this week to be more Christ-like in word and deed to everyone you meet. Try to step out of your comfort zone to expand the Christian fellowship and service you offer to family members, neighbors, ward members, or strangers. Make a goal, right? Because if you don't make a goal, then it's just a wish, and then, well, why are we doing it? Right? Make a goal and make it happen. So, any thoughts about how we can do this? About why we should do this?
You know, a thought just came to me about the developmental center that's here by the temple, and you know, for the longest time I've been feeling like I should go and serve there, but you know, that's just, there's something we can do. I mean, there's an opportunity. Hi. And so I mean, I think this is a powerful challenge, because this is what Christ did, and this is what he lived. He lived by serving others. He served, you know, his fellow men. And so I think that's a powerful thing to do.
Thanks so much, Caden. Thank you. Any other ideas before we close?
Well, the one that got me was labeling people as less active. It's so horrible. Every week I go to these missionary meetings and we create a chart, you know, update our chart on who we're working on and what has happened during the week. And the chart requires you to label people as part member or less active, and it just makes me cringe every time I see that. I think this is a this is a good reminder.
Yeah. Thank you, Wendy. Thank you so much for that. Any other comments before we sign off for today? Well, I just want to say I thank you so much for the rich conversation we've been able to enjoy together. And you know, I am moved when I study something like apartheid, especially as I see how it does connect to my life. Right? It's easy to say, hey, I'm not South African. Okay, you know, that was sad for them. I'm glad they're over it. Hopefully it'll work out for them. You know, but you know, we're in America. We don't have to worry about this. But if you really try to think about, well, what about my life? What about, you know, quote unquote apartheid in my family, you know, in my ward, in my neighborhood, etc. It really starts to hit home, and I'm grateful for the sort of the gentle reminder from the Spirit that I need to be better, and I certainly pray that I will be better at being more Christ-like, reaching out more to others, that we might enjoy righteous unity and righteous diversity. And I say that in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.
Amen.
Okay, well, have a great day, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Gentile, are we canceling our tutorials this week?
Well, I have parent and teacher conferences starting at 4. So if you want to sneak in 15 minutes before that, that's fine. If you'd like to cancel, that's fine too. However you'd like to do it. I'm available probably for a shorter time though, just because I have everything starting up.
Okay. For some reason I didn't realize. Except you won't have time to eat anything. If I.
Well, I could eat and talk to you at the same time if you don't mind me talking with my mouth full.
Okay. Well, if I show up, let me just kind of see how it goes.
Okay. Yeah. Great.
I don't want to. That'd make kind of a long day for you. So.
Well, no, it's okay. It's a long day anyway, really. So I mean, it's just one more conversation. So I'm happy to do it. Just whatever you'd like to do.
Okay. We'll plan on it then.
Okay.
Okay. Thanks.
Okay,
Mr.
great.
Gentile,
Yes, sir.
I am able to get on Brain Honey now. I talked to Mr. Anderson and he got me hooked up. And so what readings do we have due for next Tuesday?
You just go to the home and then you go to announcements. It has the whole week outlined for you.
Oh, really?
Yep. It's all there
I
online,
see
the
that.
weekly schedule.
That's awesome. Okay, thank you.
You got it, buddy. See ya.
All right, bye-bye.